Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Hivebound Convivium. Today is going to be sort of different than usual. I'm not recording in my house with a microphone. I'm out on the road on my way to work, and I've just got my little headphones in. So, that being the case, audio is going to be not the best, and you're probably going to hear me use my turn signal and that sort of thing. So, if that sort of thing bothers you, then I'm sorry. I don't know how to help you there. Um, Today's video is going to be a little unorthodox. Probably won't be a fixture of the channel. That's why I'm just going to call it a car talk, not like car talk 1, implying there will be a car talk 2. Um, Merely that this has been the time that I've had to actually sit down and talk about what's going on with the channel, what's going on with me, and why it's taken me so long to upload anything, and what's kind of going on in the background. So, some background knowledge on what's been going on in my life. I got married in December 2020, and my wife and I, we had our first child in December 2021. That's our daughter, and she's doing great now. She's very sweet. She's a little bit a little bit behind in her motor skills, but she is already like a chatterbox, very talkative. Um, but when she was born, my wife had preeclampsia, and so she was born a little early, and she also had a growth restriction, so she was a little bit small when she was born. So she spent a little while in the neonatal ICU, and then um, after that, she had this rare anemia. So we had to take trips back and forth to a specialist at a hospital. So anyway, that was a big to do, and we got that under control around July or June or July of 22. And that was around about the time when my wife and I found out that we were pregnant with our second child, which was not necessarily the plan, but, it was, I guess God decided that one bundle of joy was not enough. So, of course, my son was born. He was born in December of this year, again, because there were complications. So I, the doctors initially told us that this had the potential to be a normal pregnancy, and we thought maybe that with my daughter it was just kind of a fluke. The growth restriction thing was weird. My wife has a family history of preeclampsia and blood pressure issues and anemia, but we didn't expect it to necessarily happen with every single pregnancy. But it did happen again. So my son was born premature as well. But he was quite a bit bigger than my daughter, or at the very least, he grew faster. So right now he's at home, and he's doing really well, but he is on oxygen because he was born a little bit early. Um, and that's been difficult on my wife and I, as you can probably imagine. Having the 2 under 2 under normal circumstances is very difficult, but then when you add on top of that, like medical issues, like he can't really leave the house. The only time we've taken him anywhere really is we took him once to a family gathering because it just didn't seem right to miss Easter. Um, and then we also took him to his baptism. And other than that, he hasn't gone anywhere. My wife and I, we take turns taking our 1-year-old to mass. Um, we haven't gone on dates and stuff very much lately, so it's been a rough couple of months anyway. But then if you add on top of that, like work's been pretty bad. I've just been working a lot of hours, and the company's wanting to do some downsizing, so they're not hiring any new people. So there's the same amount of work, but less people to do it, that sort of thing. Um, And even then, I don't know how long I'll stay with this company because, I'm not going to name names, but it's a large, um, what would you call it? A large distribution network company that is wanting to do some mergers and restructuring. So I may not have a job here in a few months, but that's okay. We're just moseying on along. So that's been the background with why I haven't been posting videos, because honestly, like I can't find the time to breathe hardly with all the stuff that's going on. And my wife truly is a trooper because she's been dealing with all this. She's a stay-at-home mom, so she's been dealing with all this like by herself mostly. And when I come home early, I try to help her, but a lot of times I come home late, so I can't do much other than help put my daughter to bed, that sort of thing. So yeah, the family situation's been rough. The work situation's been rough. But more than that, I mean, when I do find myself with free time, I tend not to want to try to make a video because that's like actual work. I don't know if there's anybody else out there that works in a blue collar profession, but a lot of times you think to yourself, because I've had this happen to me before. I worked for a brief while as I worked for cash for a like carpenter, or technically he was a mason, but somebody who was working with a team of carpenters that were restoring houses. And there was something about manual labor that like really gets your mental gears turning, and then you start like to think about all the ideas that you want to just crap out when you get to a point where you can sit down and get to a computer again, and then it just never. Sometimes it works out that way, but when you're working like 10, 12-hour shifts as opposed to like 8 with a lunch break, it's a lot different. So that's kind of been my reality lately. But that being said, I do have a couple of thoughts today that, by the way, you can follow the timestamps in the video to listen to what you want to listen to, because I'm going to kind of ramble for a little while. But anyway, my first thought today that I wanted to share was just my experience of Lent, because Lent, Easter's come and gone, and Lent's come and gone, and I had a really interesting experience of Lent. I thought I would share that with you guys. One thing I really enjoyed about my Lent is, let me do some scene setting. So normally speaking, I am a news junkie, and I read the news every day and multiple times a day, and I try to stay on top of breaking news. And my wife, I think, doesn't like it when I read the news, because I think she knows that I have a propensity for doom scrolling, and I read the news will say, oh, it's horrible, the world is horrible, this happened, that happened, and I'll get kind of depressed. So I think she did this intentionally for my good. Has told me, well, why don't you give up reading the news for Lent? She gave up Facebook for Lent. And I said, okay, sure, whatever. I think the last thing I gave up for Lent last year was like soda or chocolate or something. So this was something new. I thought I would try it. And let me tell you, there is nothing, I think, more like mentally liberating than just not keeping up with the news cycle. Because I didn't realize it until I did this sort of 40-day detox, is that when you're a news junkie and you're like always trying to figure out like what's going on out in the world, so to speak, you are always sort of at the mercy of the news cycle, and it almost controls your mood, and it controls your patterns of thought. And you think that what's happening when you're reading the news is that like you're putting on, it's like sometimes you feel like you're putting on AR goggles, like I'm informed now, so I can look at reality, and there's like this extra layer on top of reality where I can see all the trends and all the things going on. or you think that the reading the news is kind of like stepping into the river of truth and like seeing which direction it's going. But really, I found that the news, if it's analogous to the river, is kind of like a river Ouroboros. It just keeps going around and around, and it keeps recycling things because at the end of the day, like, it's all narrative, which we all know that. I think anyone that's listening to my channel right now probably already knows. The media is all narrative, and yet somehow we still kind of get sucked into the cycle. At least I do. Maybe this is just a failing on my part. We still get sucked into the cycle of, well, I got to read, I got to know what's going on, and I found that no, I don't need to know what's going on. And it was a really surreal experience when my wife actually told me about something that had happened. The Nashville shooting recently. She's actually the one that broke the news to me. I didn't know about it. And it was surreal. And it almost allowed me to kind of have a more healthy, like, understanding or process of what had happened. Because normally I just read articles all the time, and I'll just leaf over an article that'll be like, so and so shot up a school, and it doesn't really faze me. But for some reason, when I'm disconnected from the matrix, so to speak, and I get that from a trusted personal source, it like hits a little bit different. So I don't know. That's my reflection on giving up reading the news for Lent. And even though I've read the news a little bit since after Easter, I'm still it's still a lot smaller of a portion of my day, and I think it's fostered a lot of mental clarity and just I think it's really helpful to sort of unplug from that. Like I said, it a lot of times when you read the news, it feels like you've got an AR filter on, like an alternate reality filter. Um, But what ends up happening, I've found, is that you just look at people and things in the world, and you just layer on top of it your own like psychoses and neuroses and your own like bad thought patterns that are inculcated and encouraged by keeping up with the latest trends, being plugged into the rumor mill. So anyway, that's my thoughts on Lent and giving up the news for Lent. I recommend it for everybody next year. You think to yourself, that old couple that lives out in the middle of the woods and they don't have cable and they don't have internet, and sometimes you think to yourself, like, maybe I would like to be like that. And then other times you think to yourself, like, what do they do all day? Like, do they just kind of sit around and like stare at paint dry? And isn't it kind of stifling to not know what's going on outside in the outside world? And I've come to figure out that no, actually, those people have the right idea. And it's funny, my dad used to work in a line of work where he had to deal with a lot of Amish people, and even Amish people know what's going on in the outside world. He would have this guy that he worked with, Joe, the Amish guy, that would actually talk to him about things like Donald Trump or this and that. So, they go around and they talk to people everywhere. And that's kind of a more organic and more human way of sort of developing an understanding of faraway things. So, like, within cultivating your understanding of the news, quote unquote, like what's going on in the outside world, you're also cultivating and refining your understanding of your own community and the people around you, which I think is nice and something we could stand to learn from. But anyway, that's that thought wrapped up. Another thought I wanted to get to was just the things I want to cover on the channel going forward. One of which is I want to do a video on Mormonism. I know this is really weird, but something I've been kind of like mulling over is the fact that, the past couple of years, like, I haven't read as much of the classics, but I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks. I've found that it's really hard to get through something that's like super dense and super meaning dense, like Aristotle or something, on audiobook. But I only really have time to listen to audiobooks. So I've been listening to a lot of like fantasy novels and things. And one of my guilty pleasures, one of the authors I really like, is Brandon Sanderson. And he's like the quintessential nerd author, I guess. There's, I think he really revels in nerd culture, quote unquote, and you could kind of, but I think he does it in sort of like a naive and honest way. But his books have been kind of a guilty pleasure of mine, and I couldn't help but notice because I knew pretty much really early on that he was a Mormon. And I think there was recently like a hit piece against him that was like making fun of him or something for being a Mormon. I don't really get that, but I do understand where people are coming from when they say that like they can kind of see the latent Mormonism in like how he builds his cosmology. Um, so that was something interesting, and then I started looking around at just fantasy and science fiction in general and how they tend to deal with themes of like the numinous of gods and divinities, and I found that they tend to have a really like material, really embodied and individualistic, I guess, approach to spiritual things. It just struck me that there's a lot of like latent Mormonism in it. I'll give you one good example. Like in a lot of fantasy stories, gods have like physical bodies, but they're not physical bodies. They're like it's like some kind of spiritual matter. And on the one hand, this gels with a sort of classical Christian understanding of like the resurrected body. But on the other hand, it sounds a lot like I've listened to interviews that Catholic apologists have done with Mormon apologists. And sometimes Mormon apologists will say that basically like God is made of like a spirit matter, or dead saints or whoever is made of like a spiritual matter because nothing exists that's not matter. Something like that. I could be mischaracterizing their position, or maybe they don't all believe that. But I have heard that from Mormons. So obviously, I'm not trying to denigrate Mormonism as a religion. It's just interesting to me how themes that I think come from or are related to Mormonism find themselves in a lot of science fiction and fantasy. There's also especially like Mormons crop up a lot in space science fiction, like the big generation ship that ends up getting hijacked in The Expanse is being built by Mormons. And then I don't know if it's like this in the books, but in the Starship Troopers movie, there's that like outpost out somewhere that supposedly provoked the bugs, and it's supposedly like Mormon fundamentalists. So I don't know. That's just interesting to me. I'd like to do a deep dive into that and just look at like the intersection of Mormonism, fantasy, and science fiction, because I hope no one will be offended if I say that Mormonism is kind of like the science fiction religion, and it makes me interested in it, but also like I'm not interested in converting to Mormonism, but I'm interested in it as like a theological and intellectual system, like just picking it apart and seeing like how does this work and where does this all come from, that sort of thing. So that's a project I'm thinking about working on. Another project I'm thinking about working on, or no, I'm not thinking about, I've decided to work on, is my Beowulf video. Gowan and the Green Knight did really well. I broke it up into parts. I think mostly it's been used by like college students who need someone to read the text to them because they're too lazy to read it themselves, and that's fine. I'm more than happy to render that service, especially because traditionally this kind of poetry would have been like orally received anyway. So there's no like I don't have any particular snobbery with audiobooks versus physical books. Like yes, audiobooks are definitely a more passive experience. So for something like systematic theology or like metaphysics, or some kind of dense philosophy tome, like definitely don't listen to it on an audiobook. You need to be able to like parse that out phrase by phrase. But for things like stories where like the story beats you kind of already know, or the characters you're already kind of familiar with, you understand. If you miss a sentence or two, like if you zone out or something like that, it's not as big of a deal. It's not impactful necessarily to the meaning, and I think you're still getting like I think there's some snobbery around like oh you have to like physically crack open the book and read from page one to the last page. I think the most important thing is just getting the information, digesting it, and like integrating that into your intellectual, into your intellect. So however it gets there doesn't really matter, but that's just my opinion. So I'm happy to just be the I read old like Anglo-Saxon English poetry guy. However, I also want to look at Beowulf from like a thematic point of view and a societal point of view, because I had a professor in one class who pointed out like the sort of concentric rings of duty and of like piety, or sort of I guess the Chinese would call it like filial piety, loyalty. That's the word I'm looking for. Um, Sort of the concentric rings of loyalty that go on in that story, and they're just really interesting, and I think they've got a lot of like cultural weight to unpack, and it would be interesting to see how that intersects with something like I don't know, like the Aeneid, for example, because that's a really big theme in the Aeneid is well, the Latin word is pietas. It's like in that poem, it's like filial piety, or like love of family, of the hearth, and duty to ancestors, duty to your family, that sort of thing. So that would be an interesting thing to do, and I'm wanting to do that. I'm thinking about having it be one long video with just timestamps that I record over a long period of time, and I also want to be able to give people like footnote style cultural context blurbs, because like a lot of things in Beowulf, I read Beowulf like 3 times for school, and every time things just don't get explained, and I honestly don't bother to go and look them up. Like I don't know who half of the like, or I didn't, I should say, know who all like half the famous like literary characters are that are referenced. Um, but it's somewhat important to the meaning. So I think it would be good for people to be able to listen to this and to feel like they have a holistic understanding of Beowulf as a text. So that's my idea. Some closing thoughts. Again, this is not going to have good audio. I'm not really going to be able to cut the audio and make it sound good. I'm just hoping that my car is quiet enough. I've tried recording this in my work truck, and my work truck is a diesel, and it's just too loud. So I hope this is listenable. There's been some other reflections that I've thought about for a little while, but I don't know if they're really something I want to get into on YouTube. My marriage sometimes has been a really difficult thing just because of all the things that we've gone through. It's really difficult as a 25-year-old man with a wife and 2 kids to kind of make it in this sort of economic climate. So that's maybe something I could touch on for the young men who are like interested in starting a family, and they're a little bit more like me, where they're kind of gung-ho about it, and they say, well, like it's true on one level that having a family really manned me up and really made me more mature and made me value different things. It really accelerated that growing up phase, because even when you're in college, and even when you're aware that, oh yeah, college is delayed adolescence, sometimes that doesn't really sink in for you until you're out in the real world with real people to take care of on your end. Um, so I just think that's something interesting. Maybe I would touch on that in the future. And then the thing that's been really interesting to me is that I'm married into a really Catholic family, at least like exteriorly. And I've noticed as time goes on, and this was especially the case with COVID, the extent to which people like feel like they can pick and choose things. And when I came into Catholicism, like I was already aware of the phenomenon of um, like cafeteria Catholics, like you do this and you don't do that because you don't feel like it. And my dad was kind of like this for a long time because my dad has this history of divorce and remarriage that gives him this very awkward relationship to the church. Um, but my my wife's family growing up, they had way different standards earlier in their marriage, for example, than they did now. And I was really shocked when, obviously it was not our intention to have two children under two, but we were happy to have that blessing in our lives, and I'm really glad that we had my son because he is so cute and so precious, and honestly, like learning to deal with him and learning to deal with his health issues has been a blessing in disguise because we've really been able to cultivate patience. That doesn't mean we are patient people, but it's just given us an opportunity to cultivate patience and cultivate tenderness in a difficult situation. And it was really shocking to me to what extent, like my in-laws, um, they felt like um, we should. Well, I won't get into the weeds, but they felt like we should flout the church's teaching on sexuality. I don't know if you're not Catholic, then you can go ahead and click off because this won't apply to you. But they said that they had a difficult experience having children. And after my wife is technically the sixth child, I think. And after they had my wife, the doctor told them not to have any more children. And so that obviously puts them in a really difficult position, which my wife and I are kind of in right now, just given our medical issues. But I was really hoping that they would, support us in um, upholding the church's moral teaching about this sort of thing, and they really didn't. It's interesting how many excuses uh, people can make for when they're in an uncomfortable position. Like they can make a lot of excuses for behavior that they know is against church teaching, and I don't know. Maybe that's not specific enough, but it's just been a really difficult thing for me and my wife to have to go through, is that you feeling like no one around is really like holding themselves to the standard that we are. Sometimes that makes people feel like holier than thou, but I guess in my wife and I's case, like we don't necessarily feel holier than thou. It just kind of gives you a sensation of like, am I a rube? Like, am I an idiot for sticking to my conscience and holding to my beliefs? So I don't know. That's been kind of an interesting segue. It's interesting the extent to which people can assent to and believe the proposition that I believe everything that the Catholic Church teaches, and I uphold its teachings even in these difficult areas, because I think that's the most important thing. Is not like I believe in being nice to the poor, but like upholding teachings that are difficult. And sometimes in a time and place, like being nice to the poor isn't necessarily like a difficult, or being charitable to the poor isn't a difficult thing. Like sometimes we live in a period of material abundance. So that's not really a hard teaching. So the value of Christianity, I think a lot of times is in the hard teaching. So right now in this particular era that we're in, a lot of the hard teachings have to do with sexuality and love and things like that. And I've noticed that only the Catholic Church. This is another reason why I'm not Orthodox, is that only the Catholic Church, I feel like, has held to those hard teachings. And I think that's kind of like, obviously, it's not true that whoever has the strictest moral system is by default correct, but I think it lends credence to a belief system if it doesn't create like um, convenient loopholes for itself to get out of sticky moral situations. Like a lot of the Orthodox have for a long time, compromised on the divorce and remarriage issue, which, as someone who comes from a divorced household, I just think is awful. And I mean, Protestants, obviously, they're in the same boat there, and then a lot of Orthodox and also Protestants are in the same boat with regards to birth control and how that has affected the body of Christ. And so I don't know if I'll make a video about that, but that's just a thought I had this morning. This morning, car talk. It's just been an opportunity for me to unload what's been on my chest. So I'm at work now. I hope you guys have a good rest of the day. I hope I didn't bore you. Look forward to videos in the near future about possibly that video of tying like Mormonism into fantasy and science fiction literature, because it's just an interesting segue that I want to go down. Look for the Beowulf video. I'm going to try to work on that soon. And also, I'm working on this essay about family and the economy and elite mismanagement, because I think all three of these things, sorry, and the spiritual life and like the decay and decline in spirituality. So I think all four of these things are connected, because my thesis going forward is kind of like the way that societies are run are fractally. So like a human body is made up of organs that all have specific functions. But then each of these organs in turn is made up of cells, which they have specific functions, but they also have general functions. So, like, for example, we have a brain that sort of like guides the motion and the reconstitution and constitution of our body and our mind. But our cells also have a nucleus that guides the constitution and reconstitution of the physical apparatuses of the cell. So we're kind of like wheels within wheels. We're kind of like systems within systems. And I feel like, the biological world works like that. And because I don't believe in this sort of like natural human distinction necessarily, this hard natural human distinction, it's necessary to think about politics and decision making and economics and all human systems as kind of an outgrowth of underlying biology. And what I mean by that is, like, for example, the family is kind of like the basic unit of society, like the cell unit, and then families combine, they make analogous organs, and then those organs combine to make an analogous body. And the economy of the body is kind of like how blood and like blood has to be oxygenated, carry oxygen around to the body. There has to be ATP synthesis going on, this sort of thing. So it's not an analogy that's old or anything, but I think I can reformulate that using the sort of like fractal analogy in a way that makes sense, in a way that's sort of succinct, and I think kind of makes sense of the ongoing like malaise in the West, is that this is just like a progression of sickness that goes from one part of the body politic to the next. And that's why we see like domino falling sort of things going on. But anyway, that's gonna be, I don't know when exactly I'll have that essay done, so I can't promise anything. But I'm for real done this time. You guys have a great day. God bless, and I hope to see you in the next video.